Tonight we have with us distinguished Professor John H. Bracey, Jr. He's been a member of the W.E.B. Du Bois Department of African American Studies at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, since 1972. As a matter of fact, he taught me and my sister Frida, and I was out there in the mid-'80s. He's been out there a long time. He previously taught African American history at Northern Illinois University and at the University of Rochester. Born in Chicago, Illinois, grew up in Washington, D.C., attended Howard University, Roosevelt University in Chicago, has done graduate work at Roosevelt and at Northwestern University. Dr. Bracey co-edited a number of volumes on various aspects of the African American experience, including Black Nationalism in America, Explorations in the Black Experience, and a revised edition of the Black Protest in the 60s. Dr. Bracey is one of the co-editors of the prize-winning African American Women and the Vote. He also has consulted on several video productions on the lives of W.E.B. Du Bois, Frederick Douglass, and A. Philip Randolph. He's a life member of the Organization of American Historians. He has delivered papers at scholarly gatherings and has lectured at campuses across the nation on various aspects of the history of Black Americans. His major interests are African American social history, radical ideologies and movements, and the history of African American women, which he will lecture on this evening. It is my distinct pleasure and privilege to introduce to you and to present to you Dr. John H. Bracey, Jr. Would you receive him at this time?
Good evening. Good evening. I want to thank Reverend Swan for inviting me to Spring of Hope. I think I spoke at the other church about 10 years ago, and the other, because this doesn't have the same vibe that the other one had. So I think it was a different church. I also made a mistake of going on the website. And I looked at the Spring of Hope website, and I came across Reverend Swan preaching on the providential power of God's promise, right? And I said, maybe he's fattening frogs for snakes, which is to say, invite me up here so he'll look better, right? They're those preachers, you know, when they get in trouble in the church, they invite the worst person they can find and have them do a guest sermon. And then the congregation said, well, he's not that bad. You should have heard the guy that was up there last week. But I know that's not the case. I've had too many of the Swan family in my classes up at UMass, and so I know I'm invited here to give a lecture, not to give a sermon. So I'm not in competition with Reverend Swan. On the other hand, growing up in Chicago and Washington D.C., there are a lot of great Black college teachers and professors who are great preachers. You know, Mordecai Johnson at Howard. Howard Thurman, Gardner Taylor out of Concord Baptist, Martin Luther King, of course, and getting closer to the Church of God in Christ, you know, Bishop Patterson. You know, Bishop Patterson is doing quite well on a college campus. He got as much sense as anybody else running around some of these places. And if you go back to the founding of, and I want to relate the history of Black women to us in our lives, and I'm going to take you back behind Bishop Patterson to the founding of course, the Church of God in Christ, Bishop Charles Harrison Mason. And so why am I talking about Bishop Mason and talking about Black women? Because Bishop Mason got the notion of sanctification by reading the autobiography of Amanda Berry Smith. Right. He hadn't heard about being sanctified till he read Amanda Berry Smith's autobiography. Right. So if you're going to look deep into the history of anything that moves in the Black community, you're going to find Black women. Right? And if you come anywhere near the most important institutions, the church, right, political life, social life in the community, passing on values to young people, you're going to find African American women. Right? And they only gave me a short time. This is a topic that I could, you know, I teach a course, several courses. I could go on for hours, but you don't want to hear me for hours. So I'm going to give you two short discussions of two women and try to link them to you and link them to me, and then we'll end up with that. The first one, of course, is Amanda Berry Smith. Right? It's maybe by chance, maybe by coincidence, maybe by providence, that 40 years ago I was asked to write a biography, a short biographical sketch of Amanda Berry Smith when I was in graduate school. I had never heard of her, I had no idea who she was. I was in Chicago, and somebody called up and said, "You're in Chicago, she died in Chicago, so there must be something there. Why don't you write us 1,000 words? We'll put it in this encyclopedia, Notable American Women." And so I found the autobiography and read it. Was quite astounded that, I thought I knew everything about black people. I had never heard of her, so I felt, really pretty stupid. And so I read the autobiography, and then it said she died at Quinn Chapel. She was buried at, had a funeral at Quinn Chapel AME Church, the oldest, most powerful kind of black church in Chicago. Archibald Carey and his son were the pastors. And just on a whim, I called up the church and asked if they have any records. Just like you pick up the phone, you can't do it nowadays, but in those days you pick up the phone, you call. And I said, "Excuse me, I'm writing about Amanda Berry Smith, and I know that she had her funeral there in 1915. Were there any programs left or any kind of documents about that?" And the woman said, "I was at the funeral." She said, "I was a young girl, and I remember it very well. What do you want to know about it?" And for the next half an hour, she told me about how important Amanda Berry Smith was. No library could have done that. Right? No library could have done that. I'm glad that the church wasn't busy that day, because she was supposed to be handling the telephones, and I didn't want to, wreck her job. But she told me why people liked her, what she did, how important she was, how important the orphanage that she built was, the spiritual power she carried as she moved through that community, And then I began to look more into Amanda Berry Smith, and she fills an important gap when we go back and look in the 19th century we know about Harriet Tubman, right? We know about Harriet Tubman going down to free slaves. She was the Moses of our people, one of the most courageous black people that ever lived, You know about Harriet Tubman when she went down to take you out of a plantation. She said, "You're going to die free." What that meant was that you weren't going back. You're going to die free over there, or if they come to get us, you're going to die free right here. Right? So if you took off with Harriet Tubman, you had to be prepared to live free or die. Right? She said, "You're not going to go back. You're not going to betray me. You're not going to tell anybody how we got this far. Right? So you're going to die free." Right? So a lot of people thought, well, maybe I'll wait till the next conductor for the Underground Railroad, somebody a little more flexible, somebody with more options, because maybe dying free is not exactly what freedom means, Maybe I could turn around and run and try it again another day. But we know about Harriet Tubman, right? Black woman that fought in the Civil War, right? Was a spy, right? And when she found out that Abraham Lincoln said the only people that could get the right to vote were black men who fought in the army, she led the only revolt of black women during the Civil War, the Combahee River Uprising. She said, if you got to kill people to get the vote, we can kill some people too. And she rose up and revolt, the only slave revolt during the Civil War. The Combahee River Uprising, black women. Took a Confederate ship, killed a bunch of people. Yeah. Still didn't get the vote. And it took 50 years to give her her pension because nobody believed she did what she did. When she said, "I fought here, I fought at Fort Wagner, I was with the 54th. I took down this Confederate fort. I smuggled these slaves off this plantation." She said, no woman could do that, and certainly no black woman. So it took them 50 years to give her a pension. Finally, the last years of her life, they gave her her pension. Right? We know about Sojourner Truth, who said, "Aren't I a woman?" Went around calling everybody out. Right? Sojourner Truth lets us know that slavery wasn't just in the South. Sojourner Truth was a slave in New York State. Never saw a plantation in Georgia. Right? She worked as a domestic slave in upstate New York. So when folk up this way get all high-minded about what slavery was down there and racism was down there, he said, no. The second largest slave state was New York, after South Carolina. New York, not Mississippi, New York. Now they abolished slavery, first 20 years of the 19th century.